Before we get started, give this video a like and subscribe if this kind of deep dive storytelling is your thing. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? A City of Shadows. Night falls heavy on Harlem, March 9th, 1929. The city is restless, its pulse quickening with the neon flicker of jazz clubs and the distant, metallic clatter of the elevated train. The streets, slick with the residue of a late winter rain, reflect the fractured glow of street lamps. Shadows stretch long across the cracked sidewalks, swallowing the alleys and corners where the city's secrets fester. In the hush between the streetcars and the shouts of newsboys, a deeper silence lingers, a silence that feels expectant, as if the city itself is holding its breath. On East 132nd Street, a narrow tenement block stands hunched against the cold, its bricks darkened by decades of coal smoke and sorrow. The buildings here are close, their windows stacked like watchful eyes. The air is tinged with the scent of starch and soap, a testament to the small laundries that serve the neighborhood's working poor. It is in one such laundry, tucked behind a battered wooden door at number 4, that Isidor Fink prepares to close up for the night. Fink is a man shaped by caution. 30 years old, slight of build, with the wary eyes of someone who has seen too much of the world's cruelty. He came to this city, like so many others, in search of safety, a place to build a quiet life far from the violence of his native Poland. Yet even here, in the supposed sanctuary of America, he trusts little and fears much. Every evening, as dusk deepens, he checks the locks on his doors and windows, testing each one twice, sometimes 3 times. The windows are nailed shut, the transom above the door barely cracked for ventilation. Fink has no family in the city, no close friends. His world is bounded by the 4 walls of his shop, the hiss of the steam iron, and the endless rhythm of laundering other people's clothes. Tonight, as the city hums and pulses outside, Fink moves through his closing routine with mechanical precision. He counts the day's receipts, stacking coins and bills into neat piles. He wipes down the counters, careful to leave no trace of the day's labor. The clock on the wall ticks past 10, its hands inching toward the hour when Harlem's nightlife surges and the respectable world retreats behind locked doors. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the panes and carrying with it the distant strains of a trumpet from a nearby speakeasy. A car backfires, echoing like a gunshot through the canyons of brick and stone. Fink flinches, his nerves taut as piano wire. He glances once more at the locks, reassures himself that all is secure. In this city, he knows, safety is an illusion, one that must be constructed, night after night, with vigilance and ritual. Yet, for all his precautions, something in the air feels wrong. Perhaps it is the way the shadows seem to press closer tonight, or the way the silence between passing cars stretches just a bit too long. Perhaps it is simply the burden of loneliness, the knowledge that in this vast city, he is utterly alone. Fink sighs, rubs his tired eyes, and prepares to extinguish the lamp. But before he can do so, a new sound intrudes, a brief, sharp noise from the alley behind the shop. He freezes, heart hammering in his chest. The city is full of dangers, thieves, drunks, men desperate enough to kill for a handful of coins. Fink hesitates, torn between curiosity and fear. He moves to the back door, listens. Nothing. Just the wind and the distant wail of a siren. He returns to his counter, trying to shake the unease. But the feeling lingers, a chill that seeps into his bones. He wonders, not for the first time, if the precautions are enough, if the locks and nails and rituals can truly keep the darkness at bay. Across the street, Mrs. Lachlan Smith, a neighbor, watches from her window. She has seen Fink close up many times before, has noted his routines, his caution. She, too, feels the weight of the night, the sense that something is amiss. She draws her shawl tighter around her shoulders and peers into the gloom, searching for any sign of trouble. The city, indifferent and immense, continues its restless dance. Somewhere, a police whistle blows. Somewhere, a lover laughs, a child cries, a drunkard curses the cold. The night deepens, and the shadows lengthen. In the little laundry at number 4, Isidor Fink prepares to face the darkness, unaware that, before the night is over, he will become the central figure in one of New York's most enduring mysteries. A man locked in, alone and afraid, about to vanish into legend. The city holds its breath. The impossible is about to happen. A city of shadows. Night falls heavy on Harlem, March 9th, 1929. The city is restless, its pulse quickening with the neon flicker of jazz clubs and the distant, metallic clatter of the elevated train. The streets, slick with the residue of a late winter rain, reflect the fractured glow of street lamps. Shadows stretch long across the cracked sidewalks, swallowing the alleys and corners where the city's secrets fester. In the hush between the streetcars and the shouts of newsboys, a deeper silence lingers, a silence that feels expectant, as if the city itself is holding its breath. On East 132nd Street, a narrow tenement block stands hunched against the cold, its bricks darkened by decades of coal smoke and sorrow. The buildings here are close, their windows stacked like watchful eyes. The air is tinged with the scent of starch and soap, a testament to the small laundries that serve the neighborhood's working poor. It is in one such laundry, tucked behind a battered wooden door at number 4, that Isidor Fink prepares to close up for the night. Fink is a man shaped by caution. 30 years old, slight of build, with the wary eyes of someone who has seen too much of the world's cruelty. He came to this city, like so many others, in search of safety, a place to build a quiet life far from the violence of his native Poland. Yet even here, in the supposed sanctuary of America, he trusts little and fears much. Every evening, as dusk deepens, he checks the locks on his doors and windows, testing each one twice, sometimes 3 times. The windows are nailed shut, the transom above the door barely cracked for ventilation. Fink has no family in the city, no close friends. His world is bounded by the 4 walls of his shop, the hiss of the steam iron, and the endless rhythm of laundering other people's clothes. Tonight, as the city hums and pulses outside, Fink moves through his closing routine with mechanical precision. He counts the day's receipts, stacking coins and bills into neat piles. He wipes down the counters, careful to leave no trace of the day's labor. The clock on the wall ticks past 10, its hands inching toward the hour when Harlem's nightlife surges and the respectable world retreats behind locked doors. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the panes and carrying with it the distant strains of a trumpet from a nearby speakeasy. A car backfires, echoing like a gunshot through the canyons of brick and stone. Fink flinches, his nerves taut as piano wire. He glances once more at the locks, reassures himself that all is secure. In this city, he knows, safety is an illusion, one that must be constructed, night after night, with vigilance and ritual. Yet, for all his precautions, something in the air feels wrong. Perhaps it is the way the shadows seem to press closer tonight, or the way the silence between passing cars stretches just a bit too long. Perhaps it is simply the burden of loneliness, the knowledge that in this vast city, he is utterly alone. Fink sighs, rubs his tired eyes, and prepares to extinguish the lamp. But before he can do so, a new sound intrudes, a brief, sharp noise from the alley behind the shop. He freezes, heart hammering in his chest. The city is full of dangers, thieves, drunks, men desperate enough to kill for a handful of coins. Fink hesitates, torn between curiosity and fear. He moves to the back door, listens. Nothing. Just the wind and the distant wail of a siren. He returns to his counter, trying to shake the unease. But the feeling lingers, a chill that seeps into his bones. He wonders, not for the first time, if the precautions are enough, if the locks and nails and rituals can truly keep the darkness at bay. Across the street, Mrs. Lachlan Smith, a neighbor, watches from her window. She has seen Fink close up many times before, has noted his routines, his caution. She, too, feels the weight of the night, the sense that something is amiss. She draws her shawl tighter around her shoulders and peers into the gloom, searching for any sign of trouble. The city, indifferent and immense, continues its restless dance. Somewhere, a police whistle blows. Somewhere, a lover laughs, a child cries, a drunkard curses the cold. The night deepens, and the shadows lengthen. In the little laundry at number 4, Isidor Fink prepares to face the darkness, unaware that, before the night is over, he will become the central figure in one of New York's most enduring mysteries. A man locked in, alone and afraid, about to vanish into legend. The city holds its breath. The impossible is about to happen. The evening air along East 132nd Street is thick with the residue of coal smoke and the sharp tang of detergent. As the city's heartbeat quickens with the coming night, Isidor Fink stands beneath the flickering bulb of his laundry shop, hands trembling slightly as he counts the last of the day's coins. The world outside is a cacophony of distant jazz, the slap of shoes on wet pavement, and the low, mournful whistle of a train cutting through Harlem's darkness. But inside, in this cramped, steam-filled sanctuary, Fink's world is all routine, all ritual, a fortress built on caution. He is a man of habit, shaped by necessity and fear. Born in Poland, he crossed an ocean to escape the violence and uncertainty of the old world, only to find that the new world held its own dangers. The city is a living thing, hungry, unpredictable, and indifferent to the fates of men like him. Fink's laundry is both his livelihood and his refuge, a place where he can control the chaos, if only for a few hours each night. He moves through the shop with deliberate care, his footsteps muffled on the worn linoleum. The last shirts are pressed and hung, the counters wiped clean of starch and soap. He pauses to listen, always listening for the sounds that don't belong. A footstep in the alley, a voice raised in anger, the telltale rattle of a lock disturbed. Tonight, as every night, he finds comfort in the familiar, the hiss of the iron, the soft thump of folded linen, the click of the cash register as he tallies the day's earnings. At 10:15 p.m., Fink glances at the clock. The hour is late. The city's respectable folk have retreated behind their own locked doors. He steps to the front of the shop and peers through the grimy glass, watching as a lone figure hurries past, coat collar turned up against the cold. The street is empty now, save for the occasional flicker of headlights and the distant echo of laughter from a nearby speakeasy. He exhales, a slow, measured breath, and turns his attention to the locks. There are 3 in total, 2 heavy deadbolts and a stout chain, each installed after a different brush with the city's underbelly. Fink engages them one by one, testing each with a practiced hand. He knows every creak, every stubborn turn of the key. The windows, too, are secured, nailed shut months ago after a rash of burglaries swept the neighborhood. The only opening is the narrow transom above the door, barely wide enough to admit a stray cat, let alone a man. He checks the back door as well, sliding the iron bolt into place and giving it a sharp tug. Satisfied, he returns to the front, scanning the room for anything out of place. The laundry is small, barely more than a single room with a partitioned nook for his cot and a battered chest where he keeps his few valuables. Everything is as it should be. Fink moves to the lamp and lowers the wick, plunging the shop into a soft, amber glow. He listens again, straining to hear past the hum of the city. Somewhere, a dog barks. Somewhere, a woman's voice rises in song, then fades. He allows himself a moment of stillness, the rare luxury of feeling, however briefly, that he is safe. He sits on the edge of his cot, removing his shoes and rubbing his tired feet. The day has been long, too many deliveries, too many customers in a hurry, each one a reminder of how invisible he is in this city of millions. He thinks of home, of the family he left behind, of the friends lost to war and poverty. He wonders if they would recognize him now, this cautious, solitary man who trusts no one and fears everything. A sudden noise startles him, a sharp, metallic clang from the alley behind the shop. Fink freezes, heart pounding. He waits, breath held, listening. Silence. He rises, moving quietly to the back door, pressing his ear to the wood. Nothing. Just the wind, perhaps, or a stray cat knocking over a trash can. Still, he cannot shake the feeling of unease. He returns to his cot, but sleep will not come. He lies awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events in his mind. He thinks of the customer who lingered too long, asking questions about his hours, his habits. He thinks of the boy who delivered the starch, as darting around the shop as if searching for something worth stealing. He thinks of the city itself, a place of endless promise and endless peril, where a man can disappear without a trace and no one will ask why. Fink rises again, unable to rest. He checks the locks once more, fingers tracing the cold metal. He tests the windows, the transom, the back door. Everything is secure. He returns to the lamp, turning it down until only a faint glow remains. He sits, waiting for the night to pass, for the city to quiet, for the sense of dread to lift. But tonight, the darkness feels different, thicker, more oppressive. The shadows press closer, the silence deeper. Fink shivers, pulling his thin blanket tighter around his shoulders. He tells himself that he is safe, that the locks will hold, that the city's dangers cannot reach him here. He is wrong. Outside, the city moves on, oblivious to the small drama unfolding behind the locked door of the laundry. The trains rattle past, the jazz plays on, the night deepens. In the window across the street, Mrs. Lachlan Smith watches, her face pale in the lamplight. She sees Fink's shadow move behind the curtain, sees the lamp flicker and die. She wonders, as she does every night, how a man can live so alone, so afraid. Inside, Isidor Fink settles in for the night, unaware that his rituals, his caution, his fortress of locks and bolts will not be enough. The city waits, patient and implacable. The impossible is about to happen. And somewhere, in the darkness outside, someone is watching. The hour is late, and Harlem's pulse has slowed to a steady, nocturnal thrum. In the tenement across the narrow street, Mrs. Lachlan Smith sits in her small parlor, the faint light of her reading lamp casting long shadows on the faded wallpaper. She is a widow, accustomed to solitude, her evenings spent with the comforting crackle of the radio and the gentle creak of the building settling into the night. The city outside is a living thing, restless even in sleep, but Mrs. Smith has learned to distinguish the ordinary sounds from those that pretend trouble. Tonight, something is different. The air feels charged, as if the city itself is bracing for a storm. Through her window, she can see the dull glow from Isidor Fink's laundry, the silhouette of the cautious man moving about his business. She has watched him for years, noting his routines, his careful habits. She knows, in the way neighbors do, that he is a man who trusts little and expects the worst. She feels a kinship with his caution, a silent understanding between two souls who have learned that the world can be unkind. It is just after 10:30 when the peace is shattered. The first sound is sharp and sudden, a muffled crash, as if something heavy has fallen. Mrs. Smith sits up, heart quickening. She listens, holding her breath. Then comes a series of frantic noises, a scuffle, the scrape of furniture, and above it all, a voice, high, desperate, and unmistakably terrified. It is a sound that slices through the night, a cry for help that seems to echo off the tenement walls. Help! Help me! The voice is strangled, cut short by a guttural gasp. Mrs. Smith's blood runs cold. She knows, with a certainty born of long city nights, that something terrible is happening just across the street. For a moment, she is frozen, paralyzed by fear and indecision. The city teaches its residents to mind their own business, to look away from trouble, but Mrs. Smith cannot ignore the urgency in that cry. She rises, fumbling for her shawl, her hands shaking. She moves to the window, peering into the darkness. The street is empty, the only movement the flicker of Fink's lamp behind the frosted glass. She sees nothing, but the sounds continue. Thuds, a choking groan, then a silence so profound it seems to press against her chest. Panic surges. She glances at the clock, 10:33. She knows the police station is only a few blocks away, but every second feels like an eternity. She hesitates only a moment longer before rushing to her door, her slippers scuffing against the worn floorboards. She fumbles with the lock, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The hallway is cold and empty. She hurries down the stairs, clutching her shawl around her shoulders, her mind racing with fear and dread. The city outside is eerily quiet, the usual sounds of laughter and music replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. She glances once more at Fink's shop, the light still burning, the door firmly shut. She quickens her pace, her footsteps echoing in the empty street. The police station looms ahead, its windows aglow with the promise of safety. She bursts through the door, breathless and wild-eyed, startling the officers inside. There's trouble. Across the street, the laundry, she gasps, her voice trembling with urgency. I heard screams. Something's wrong. Please, you must come quickly. The officers exchange glances, their expressions shifting from annoyance to concern. They know Mrs. Smith, know her to be sensible, not prone to flights of fancy. One rises, grabbing his hat and coat, signaling to his partner. "Show us," he says, and Mrs. Smith nods, leading them back into the night. As they hurry across the street, Mrs. Smith's mind races with questions and fears. What could have happened to poor Mr. Fink? Who could have gotten inside his fortress of locks and bolts? The city is full of dangers, but she has never felt them so close, so immediate. They reach the laundry, the officers pounding on the door, calling Fink's name. There is no answer, only the oppressive silence of a room that should not be silent. Mrs. Smith stands back, wringing her hands, watching as the officers try the door, then the windows, finding everything locked tight. She feels a chill settle over her, a sense that something truly impossible has happened. The city, usually so noisy and alive, seems to hold its breath, waiting for the next terrible revelation. Inside the laundry, all is still. The lamp burns low, casting twisted shadows on the walls. Whatever violence has occurred is hidden behind locked doors and nailed windows, a secret sealed away from the world. As the officers search for a way in, Mrs. Smith stands vigil in the street, her heart pounding, her mind replaying the awful sound she heard. She knows, with a certainty that chills her to the bone, that nothing will ever be the same. The night has been broken, and with it, the fragile sense of safety that once held the darkness at bay. The night air is brittle as the officers, led by Sergeant Michael McCarthy, stride purposefully behind Mrs. Smith, her urgent steps echoing on the slick Harlem pavement. The city's usual soundtrack, jazz riffs, laughter, the clatter of the L, has faded into a tense hush. The only sound is the hurried scuff of shoes and the quick, nervous breaths of the woman who roused them from their late-night routine. They reach the laundry at 4 East 132nd Street. The shop's single lamp still glows faintly behind the frosted glass, casting warped shadows on the sidewalk. Mrs. Smith points, her voice trembling. "He's in there. I heard screams. Something's wrong." Sergeant McCarthy raps sharply on the door. "Mr. Fink. Police. Open up." His partner, Officer O'Leary, circles to the back, shining his flashlight along the alley's brick walls. There is no answer, no movement, no shuffling footsteps, not even the creak of floorboards. Only silence, thick and absolute. The officers exchange a glance. McCarthy tries the door handle. It does not budge. He leans in, examining the heavy deadbolts. "Locked tight," he mutters. He moves to the windows, small, grimy, and nailed shut with thick, rusted spikes. He presses his palm against the glass, peering inside. The room is still, the counters neatly arranged, the cash register closed. There is no sign of chaos, no overturned furniture, no blood on the floor. Just the eerie stillness of a place abandoned in an instant. O'Leary returns from the alley, shaking his head. Back doors bolted from the inside. No sign of forced entry. He tries the knob, rattling it with increasing frustration. Not even a scratch. McCarthy turns to Mrs. Smith. "You're certain you heard something? Not just a cat or a drunk?" She nods, her face pale and resolute. "I know what I heard. He was screaming. There was a struggle." The officers regroup at the front door, considering their options. The transom window above the door is barely a foot high, a relic from another era. McCarthy eyes it, then the crowd gathering on the sidewalk, neighbors drawn by the commotion, faces pressed against the glass, voices whispering in anxious tones. "We need to get inside," McCarthy says. "O'Leary, boost me up." But even standing on his partner's shoulders, McCarthy cannot squeeze through the narrow opening. He shines his flashlight inside, illuminating the cramped interior, the ironing board, the piles of laundry, the battered cot in the corner. No movement, no sign of life. A boy from the crowd, no more than 12, pipes up. "I can fit, sir." The officers hesitate, but time is slipping away. McCarthy nods grimly. "All right, son. Be careful." They lift the boy up, and he wriggles through the transom, dropping with a soft thud onto the laundry floor. The crowd holds its breath as he disappears from view, the only sound the faint jingle of keys as he unlocks the door from within. The officers burst inside, their senses immediately assaulted by the sharp tang of detergent and the oppressive heat of the closed room. They sweep their flashlights across the space, searching for signs of violence, for the source of the disturbance. And then they see him. Isidor Fink lies sprawled on the floor near the ironing board, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood stains his shirt, pooling beneath him in a dark, spreading halo. His face is frozen in a mask of terror, eyes wide open, mouth agape as if still trying to scream. There is no weapon in sight, no sign of the assailant. No broken windows, no forced locks, no footprints on the freshly scrubbed floor. The officers move quickly, checking for a pulse, but it is clear Fink is dead. Shot, it appears, at close range. The wounds are precise, the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. But how? The doors were locked from the inside. The windows nailed shut. The only possible exit, the tiny transom, is still intact and far too small for an adult to pass through. McCarthy stands at the center of the room, turning slowly, his mind racing. This doesn't make sense, he mutters. It's like he was murdered in a sealed box. O'Leary checks the cash register, untouched. Fink's wallet, still in his pocket, is full of bills. Nothing has been stolen. There is no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no shattered glass. Only the silent testimony of the dead man and the impossible puzzle of his murder. Outside, the crowd grows, their whispers swelling into a chorus of speculation and fear. The officers call for reinforcements, for the coroner, for anyone who might make sense of this scene. But as they wait, one thing becomes clear. They are standing at the threshold of a mystery that defies logic, a crime that should not be possible. The room is locked. The windows are nailed shut. There is no way in or out. And yet, Isidor Fink is dead. The city's darkness presses in, as if eager to swallow the secret whole. The officers exchange uneasy glances, the weight of the impossible settling over them like a shroud. In the days to come, detectives, journalists, and amateur sleuths will all try to solve the riddle of the locked room. But tonight, in this tiny Harlem laundry, the only certainty is that the city has claimed another secret, and it does not give up its secrets easily. The heavy door groans open at last, the key rattling in the trembling hands of the neighborhood boy who squeezed through the transom. The officers, McCarthy and O'Leary, step into the humid, close air of Isidor Fink's laundry. The crowd outside is held at bay by the stern warnings of a third patrolman, but their anxious whispers filter in through the crack in the door, mingling with the faint, acrid scent of gunpowder and the ever-present perfume of starch and soap. The room is surprisingly tidy. The counters are wiped clean, the cash register closed, the day's laundry folded in neat piles. The lamp on the far table casts a weak, flickering light, illuminating the small, cramped space. It takes only a moment for the officers' eyes to adjust, and then they see him. Isidor Fink lies sprawled on his back near the ironing board, his limbs twisted as if caught mid-flight. His shirt is stained dark with blood, the crimson spreading out in a grotesque bloom across his chest. His face, usually so guarded and composed, is frozen in a mask of terror, eyes wide open, lips parted in a final, silent gasp. For a moment, the officers stand frozen, the impossibility of the scene holding them in its grip. McCarthy is the first to move. He kneels beside the body, pressing 2 fingers to Fink's throat, searching for a pulse he knows he will not find. The skin is already cooling, the blood congealing in the folds of fabric. O'Leary scans the room, his gaze darting from the locked doors to the nailed-shut windows, to the tiny, dust-choked transom above the entrance. There is no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass, no footprints in the thin layer of starch dust on the floor. 3 wounds, McCarthy murmurs, his voice low and grim. 2 in the chest, 1 through the wrist. Close range, by the looks of it. O'Leary's eyes narrow. Where's the gun? They search the room methodically, moving with the grim efficiency of men who have seen too much death. They check beneath the ironing board, behind the counter, inside the battered chest where Fink kept his meager valuables. There is no weapon, no shell casings, no sign that anyone but Fink himself has touched the room in hours. The coroner arrives, a thin, bespectacled man with a battered black bag and a weary expression. He examines the body, his fingers probing the wounds, his nose wrinkling at the faint, metallic tang of blood. Shot at close range, he confirms. No powder burns on the shirt, but the wounds are tight. Whoever did this was standing right over him. McCarthy stands, wiping his hands on a handkerchief. But how did they get in? And how did they get out? The coroner shakes his head. I've seen a lot of murders in this city. Never one like this. The officers turn their attention to the rest of the room, searching for anything that might explain the impossible. The doors are locked from the inside, the bolts still engaged. The windows are nailed shut, the nails rusted and undisturbed. The transom is barely a foot high, choked with dust and grime. No adult could have passed through it, and there is no sign that it has been disturbed. They check Fink's pockets. His wallet is still there, thick with bills. The cash register is untouched, the day's receipts stacked neatly inside. There is no sign of robbery, no evidence of a struggle. Only the 3 bullet wounds, 2 in the chest, 1 through the wrist, as if Fink had tried to shield himself from the final, fatal shot. Outside, the crowd grows. Neighbors press against the glass, their faces pale and anxious. Mrs. Smith stands at the edge of the sidewalk, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her eyes fixed on the darkened doorway. She knows, as do the others, that something impossible has happened here, that the city has claimed another secret, one that may never be explained. The detectives arrive, their faces grim, their notebooks ready. They ask the same questions, receive the same answers. No one saw anyone enter or leave. No one heard more than a few frantic noises, a cry for help, a final, choking gasp. The room is a sealed box, a puzzle with no solution. The coroner finishes his examination and stands, wiping his hands on a blood-stained cloth. Time of death, sometime between 10:30 and 10:45. Cause of death, gunshot wounds to the chest. No sign of suicide, these wounds couldn't have been self-inflicted, and there's no weapon in the room. The detectives confer in hushed tones, their words heavy with disbelief. It's a locked room mystery, one mutters. Like something out of a dime novel. But this is no fiction. This is Harlem, 1929, a city of shadows and secrets, of violence and fear. And Isidor Fink, the cautious laundryman, has become its latest, most baffling victim. The officers seal the room, posting the guard at the door. The detectives begin their work, photographing the scene, dusting for fingerprints, searching for any clue that might explain the impossible. But as the hours pass and the city slips deeper into night, one fact becomes clear: there is no explanation, no motive, no suspect, no way in or out. Only the body of Isidor Fink, shot 3 times in a room no one could have entered or left. The city's darkness presses in, swallowing the light, the hope, the possibility of answers. The impossible has happened, and the city will never be the same. The city's first light has not yet crept between the tenement bricks when the detectives gather in Isidor Fink's laundry, their faces drawn and pale under the harsh glow of lanterns. The room is heavy with the scent of blood and starch, the air still thick from the night's violence. Outside, the crowd is thinned, but a few neighbors linger, whispering theories in anxious tones. Inside, the authorities stand in a silent circle, each man wrestling with the same impossible question. How did Isidor Fink die? Detective Charles McKenna, a veteran of the force, is the first to speak. He stands at the center of the room, feet planted firmly on the worn linoleum, eyes narrowed as he surveys the scene. Let's be clear, he says, voice low and steady. We have a man shot dead in a room locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry. No weapon. No motive. No suspect. The others nod, their expressions grim. The facts are undeniable, yet the explanation eludes them. They move through the room, retracing their steps, searching for anything they might have missed. The doors are still locked, the bolts engaged. The windows remain nailed shut, the transom undisturbed. The only way in or out is the front door, and that was locked tight until the boy crawled through the transom to let them in. The coroner, Dr. Samuel Hirsch, stands over Fink's body, his hands stained with blood and ink from his notes. These wounds, he says, gesturing to the 3 bullet holes, are not self-inflicted. The angles are wrong. The entry points are too precise. And there's no gunpowder on his hands or shirt. This was no suicide. Detective McKenna nods. And yet, there's no gun. No shell casings. No sign that anyone else was here. They consider the possibility of a hidden weapon, searching every inch of the small room. They check beneath the ironing board, behind the counter, inside the battered chest. They lift the mattress on Fink's cot, sift through the piles of laundry, even examine the drain and the floor. Nothing. The gun has vanished, as if it never existed. The detectives turn to the windows, examining the rusty nails that hold them shut. They test each one, finding them solid and undisturbed. The glass is intact, no cracks or chips, no sign that it has been tampered with. The transom above the door is barely a foot high, choked with dust and grime. No adult could have squeezed through it, and there is no evidence that it has been opened in years. They question the neighbors, searching for any clue that might explain the impossible. Mrs. Smith, still pale and shaken, insists she heard screams, a struggle, the unmistakable sound of violence. Others confirm her account, though none saw anyone enter or leave the shop. The street was quiet, the only movement the flicker of Fink's lamp behind the frosted glass. The detectives consider the possibility of a hidden passage, a secret door or tunnel that might have allowed the killer to escape. They tap on the walls, searching for hollow spots, loose boards, anything that might suggest a concealed exit. But the room is solid, the walls thick with decades of plaster and brick. There is no way in or out. As the hours pass, the detectives grow more frustrated, their initial theories collapsing under the weight of the evidence. Suicide is impossible, there is no weapon, and the wounds could not have been self-inflicted. Robbery is ruled out, nothing has been stolen, and Fink's wallet and the cash register are untouched. The possibility of an accident is dismissed. These are deliberate, targeted gunshots, not the result of a struggle or a misfire. The press arrives, their notebooks ready, their questions sharp. How does a man get shot to death in a locked room? One reporter asks, his voice tinged with disbelief. How does the killer get in and out without leaving a trace? Detective McKenna has no answer. He stands in the center of the room, staring at the bloodstained floor, his mind racing with possibilities. He has seen many murders in his career, crimes of passion, crimes of greed, crimes born of desperation and madness. But never one like this. Never a murder that defies logic, that mocks the very idea of cause and effect. Theories swirl through the room like smoke. Some suggest the killer was already inside, hiding in the shadows, waiting for Fink to let down his guard. But the room is too small, too cramped, and the search too thorough for anyone to have remained hidden. Others propose that the shots were fired through the transom or a crack in the door. But the wounds are too close, the angles too precise, the powder burns absent. A few whisper of supernatural forces, of ghosts and curses, of a city haunted by its own violence. But the detectives are men of reason, bound by the laws of physics and probability. They cannot accept the impossible, even as it stares them in the face. As the day wears on, the detectives grow weary, their hope of finding a solution fading with the light. They file their reports, catalog the evidence, and seal the room. The case is declared insoluble by the police commissioner, a locked room mystery that will haunt the city for years to come. Outside, the city moves on, its pulse quickening as the sun rises over Harlem. The neighbors return to their routines, the laundry is shuttered, and Isidor Fink's name fades into the background noise of a city that never truly sleeps. But for those who were there, for the detectives, the neighbors, the reporters, the memory of that night lingers, a reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved. The impossible has happened, and the city is left to wonder, who killed Isidor Fink, and how did they escape a room that was locked from the inside? The first rays of a gray Harlem dawn slip through the cracks in the nailed-shut windows, glancing off the dull brass of the police badges clustered inside Isidor Fink's laundry. The detectives and officers, faces drawn with fatigue and frustration, have spent the night combing every inch of the cramped room. Now, as the city outside stirs to life, the forensics team arrives, sober men in dark coats, their leather cases bristling with the tools of their trade. They move with quiet authority, setting up lamps and magnifiers, their presence lending the room an air of clinical detachment. Dr. Samuel Hirsch, the city's chief medical examiner, kneels beside Fink's body, his gloved hands steady as he inspects the wounds. The air is heavy with the mingled scents of blood, starch, and the faint, acrid residue of gunpowder. Hirsch's assistants photograph the scene, capturing every angle, every detail, the bloodstains, the position of the body, the undisturbed piles of laundry, the locked doors and windows. Each click of the camera is a futile attempt to impose order on chaos. The first task is to establish the nature of the wounds. Hirsch leans in close, examining the ragged holes in Fink's shirt and flesh. 2 wounds pierce the chest, clustered near the heart. A third is torn through the left wrist, shattering bone and sinew. Hirsch notes the tight grouping of the shots, the absence of powder burns on the fabric, the clean, almost surgical entry points. He murmurs to Detective McKenna, who stands nearby, notebook in hand. These were fired at close range, Hirsch says, his voice low and precise. No more than a few feet away. The killer was standing right over him. McKenna frowns, glancing around the tiny room. But there's no gun. No shell casings. No sign anyone else was here. Hirsch nods, his brow furrowed. He directs his assistant to dust the wounds for powder residue, to swab the skin for traces of nitrates. The results are swift and unequivocal. The shots were fired from a revolver, likely a .32 or .38 caliber, at a distance of less than 3 feet. The lack of powder burns on the shirt suggests the muzzle was pressed close, but not in direct contact with the fabric. The wounds are lethal, the work of someone who knew exactly where to aim. The forensics team turns their attention to the rest of the room. They dust for fingerprints, examining every surface, door handles, counters, the cash register, the battered chest. Only Fink's prints are found, smudged and overlapping in the places he touched most often. There are no foreign prints, no signs of a struggle, no evidence that anyone else has set foot in the room. They inspect the locks and bolts, confirming what the detectives already know. Both doors were locked from the inside, the bolts engaged, the keys resting in their usual places. The windows are nailed shut, the nails rusted and undisturbed. The transom above the door is coated in dust, its hinges stiff with age. No adult could have squeezed through it, and there is no sign that it has been opened in years. The floor is swept for footprints, but the thin layer of starch dust remains unbroken, save for the scuff marks left by the officers and the boy who unlocked the door. There are no muddy prints, no traces of blood, nothing to suggest that a killer entered or left the room. The forensics team examines the trajectory of the bullets, mapping the angles and distances. The shots were fired from above, at a downward angle, consistent with someone standing over Fink as he crouched or fell. The wounds to the chest are tight, the work of a steady hand. The shot through the wrist suggests a defensive gesture, as if Fink raised his arm in a futile attempt to shield himself from the final, fatal blow. Hirsch stands, wiping his hands on a cloth. He turns to McKenna, his expression grim. There's no doubt. He was murdered, shot at close range, likely by someone he knew or someone who caught him completely by surprise. McKenna paces the room, his mind racing. But how did the killer get in? And how did they get out? Hirsch shakes his head. I can't answer that. All I can tell you is that the shots were fired from inside the room. There's no evidence of an intruder, no sign of forced entry, no foreign prints. It's as if the killer vanished into thin air. The detectives gather, reviewing the evidence, their frustration mounting. The facts are clear, but the explanation remains elusive. Fink was shot 3 times at close range, in a room locked from the inside. There is no weapon, no shell casings, no sign of a struggle. The only fingerprints belong to Fink himself. The killer has left no trace, no hair, no fibers, no footprints, nothing. The press seizes on the mystery, dubbing it the locked room enigma. Headlines scream of the impossible murder, the perfect crime. Reporters speculate wildly, offering theories that range from the plausible to the fantastic. A killer hidden in the walls, a secret passage, a weapon thrown out the window and retrieved by an accomplice. But the detectives know better. They have searched every inch of the room, every corner of the building, every alley and rooftop for blocks around. There is no secret passage, no hidden door, no evidence of an accomplice. The forensics team packs up their equipment, their faces etched with frustration. They have done all they can, but the mystery remains. The evidence tells a clear story, a man murdered at close range, in a room no one could have entered or left. But the how, the why, the who, these questions linger, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. As the sun rises over Harlem, casting long shadows across the bloodstained floor, the detectives are left with only the impossible. The city outside stirs to life, oblivious to the enigma that festers behind the locked door of Isidor Fink's laundry. The case files are thick with reports and photographs. But the truth remains just out of reach, a phantom lurking in the shadows. The forensics are clear. Fink was shot at close range by a killer who left no trace. The scene defies logic, mocks explanation, and cements its place as one of the most baffling mysteries in the city's history. The morning after the murder, the little laundry at 4 East 132nd Street has become a fortress of questions. Detectives, forensics men, and uniformed officers move about the cramped space, their faces set in lines of frustration and disbelief. The city outside is waking, but inside these walls, time seems frozen, caught in a loop of impossibility. Detective Charles McKenna stands beneath the narrow transom window above the front door, his brow furrowed in concentration. The glass is clouded with dust, the wood frame warped by years of humidity and neglect. It is a relic from another era, a feature meant for ventilation in the days before electric fans, now a silent witness to an impossible crime. He motions for Officer O'Leary to bring a stepladder. The two men stand shoulder to shoulder, examining the transom with the scrutiny of jewelers inspecting a rare stone. Could a man fit through there? O'Leary asks, skepticism thick in his voice. McKenna shakes his head, measuring the opening with a tape. 11 inches high, maybe 20 wide. You'd have to be a child or a contortionist. He tries to picture it. A grown man, shoulders hunched, knees drawn to his chest, somehow wriggling through the narrow gap. The idea is absurd. Even the boy who unlocked the door for the police had to twist and squirm, and he was half the size of an adult. The transom, still caked with dust, shows no sign of recent disturbance. No fingerprints, no smears, no flakes of paint or wood on the floor below. Forensics confirms it. The dust is undisturbed, the hinges stiff with disuse. No one has passed through this window in months, perhaps years. Still, McKenna cannot let go of the possibility. He calls for the boy again, the same one who had crawled through the night before. The officers lift him up, and he demonstrates how he squeezed through, his small frame barely clearing the frame. When he drops to the floor, he brushes off his shirt, looking sheepish and proud. The detectives thank him, but the demonstration only deepens the mystery. If a child could get in, O'Leary says, maybe the killer was a child. McKenna considers it, then shakes his head. The wounds on Fink's body, the precision, the force suggest an adult. The likelihood of a child committing such a crime, with such cold efficiency, is vanishingly small. Besides, there are no small footprints, no signs of a child's presence in the dust on the floor. The detectives turn to the window itself. They examine the latch, the frame, the sill. There are no scratches, no tool marks, no evidence that it has been forced or tampered with. The glass is unbroken, the putty old and brittle. They shine a flashlight through the opening, illuminating the street outside. The angle is awkward, the view limited. Even if someone had managed to fire a gun through the transom, the trajectory would be all wrong. The wounds on Fink's body are downward, not upward. They consider the possibility of an accomplice, someone small enough to slip through the window, someone waiting outside to retrieve the weapon. But the street was empty, the neighbors vigilant. Mrs. Smith, who heard the commotion, insists she saw no one enter or leave. The other residents, roused by the noise, confirm her account. The only person seen near the shop was Fink himself, locking up for the night. The detectives consult the building's blueprints, searching for hidden passages, crawl spaces, vents, anything that might explain the killer's escape. But the laundry is a simple, one-room structure, its walls solid brick, its floor unbroken. The only exits are the front and back doors, both locked from the inside, and the tiny transom above the entrance. As the day wears on, the transom becomes a symbol of the case itself, a narrow, impossible opening through which the truth might one day emerge. But for now, it remains closed, a barrier between the world of reason and the realm of the inexplicable. Reporters seize on the detail, their headlines blaring. Murderer vanishes through thin air. Impossible crime baffles police. The public is captivated, their imaginations ignited by the image of a killer slipping through a space no adult could possibly fit. The detectives, for all their experience and training, are left with nothing but questions. The transom is too small. The doors are locked. The windows are nailed shut. And yet, Isidor Fink is dead, shot at close range, in a room no one could have entered or left. As the sun sets over Harlem, Casting long shadows across the bloodstained floor, the investigators gather their notes and prepare to leave. The transom, high above the door, catches the last light of day, its dusty glass glowing like a faded memory. It is a window to nowhere, a passage that leads only to more questions. The city outside moves on, indifferent to the mystery that lingers in the little laundry. But for those who stood beneath the transom, who measured its impossible dimensions and searched its undisturbed dust, the question remains, how did the killer get in? And how did they get out? The answer, if it exists, is locked away, just like the room itself. The morning after Isidor Fink's impossible murder, the air in the laundry is thick with tension and the metallic scent of old blood. The room, once a haven of routine and order, now feels claustrophobic. Every corner, every shadow, a potential hiding place for answers that refuse to be found. The detectives, already exhausted by the night's fruitless theorizing, turn to the only possibility that remains. Perhaps the killer never left. Detective McKenna, his jaw clenched and eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep, stands in the center of the cramped space, surveying the walls as if willing them to reveal their secrets. The idea is whispered first by one of the uniformed men, half in jest, half in desperation. Maybe he's still here. Maybe there's a secret door, a crawl space, something we missed. The suggestion, absurd as it sounds, takes hold. After all, the crime itself is absurd, a murder with no entry, no exit, no trace. With a renewed sense of purpose, the investigators begin their meticulous search. They tap along the walls, listening for the hollow thud that might betray a false panel or hidden compartment. The brickwork is old but solid, the plaster thick and unyielding. They run their hands along the baseboards, searching for loose boards or hidden latches. Each time a nail creaks or a board shifts, hope flickers, only to be extinguished by the stubborn reality of solid construction. The battered chest in the corner is emptied, its contents, old receipts, threadbare linens, a few personal effects, spread across the floor and examined for any sign of tampering. The cot is lifted, mattress and frame scrutinized for gaps or cavities. The laundry's small partition, barely more than a screen separating Fink's meager sleeping quarters from the shop, is dismantled and rebuilt, every joint and seam inspected. Forensics men crawl beneath the ironing board, shine flashlights into every nook and cranny, peer behind the stove and the shelves stacked with soap and starch. They check the floor for trapdoors, the ceiling for attic hatches. The only opening, the narrow transom above the door, is again measured, its dust undisturbed, its hinges stiff and rusted. The windows, nailed shut and painted over, betray no evidence of recent movement. Frustration mounts. The detectives, so used to finding answers in the overlooked and the hidden, are forced to confront the possibility that there is nothing to find. The room is simple, unadorned, and brutally honest in its construction. There are no secret passages, no false walls, no hidden crawl spaces. The only things hidden here are the answers themselves. McKenna stands back, surveying the chaos of the search. He feels the weight of the city's expectations pressing down on him, the press clamoring for a solution, the commissioner demanding results, the neighbors whispering about ghosts and curses. He glances at Fink's body, now removed but still present in the bloodstains and the silence. The locked room remains locked, not just by bolts and nails, but by the limits of human understanding. The search for a hidden killer yields nothing but dust and disappointment. The detectives are left with the same impossible facts. Isidor Fink was murdered in a room no one could have entered or left, with no weapon, no motive, and no suspect. The walls, solid and unyielding, offer no escape, not for the killer, and not for the truth. As the investigators pack up their tools and prepare to leave, a hush settles over the room. The impossible has happened, and the city is left to wonder, if the killer was never here, where did he go? And if he was here, how did he vanish without a trace? The laundry, once a place of order and routine, is now a monument to the unsolvable, a locked room that guards its secrets as jealously as the city itself. In the aftermath of the exhaustive search for hidden compartments and secret exits, the detective's attention turns to motive. If this was not a murder born of opportunity, a killer slipping in and out to snatch what he could, then what, or who, could have driven someone to commit such a calculated, impossible crime? The answer, or lack thereof, only deepens the enigma. Detective McKenna stands at the battered wooden counter, his gloved hands methodically opening the cash register. The familiar metallic clang echoes in the silent room. Inside, the day's receipts sit untouched, coins stacked, bills folded with the precision of a man who trusted only in order. McKenna counts them twice, then 3 times. Every cent is accounted for. He checks the ledger book, its pages filled with neat columns of numbers and names, customers, deliveries, payments due. Nothing is missing, nothing out of place. He turns to Fink's wallet, found in the dead man's pocket. It, too, is full of bills of various denominations, a few coins, a faded photograph of a woman and child, perhaps family left behind in Europe. There is no sign of a hurried search, no evidence that the killer rifled through Fink's belongings in the desperate hope of finding hidden cash. The detectives examine the battered chest in the corner, its contents spread across the floor, a pocket watch, a silver ring, a handful of personal papers. All of it remains, unclaimed and undisturbed. The officers move through the room, cataloging every item of value. The iron, the sewing machine, the few pieces of jewelry Fink owned, nothing has been taken. Even the day's laundry, carefully folded and stacked, is left as it was. There is no sign that the killer was interested in anything but Fink himself. The conclusion is inescapable. This was not a robbery gone wrong. The killer did not come for money or valuables. He or she came for Isidor Fink. The detectives gather in the narrow space, their voices hushed. If it wasn't robbery, O'Leary says, then what was it? Revenge? Jealousy? Madness? McKenna shakes his head. Fink had no enemies. No debts. No one in the neighborhood had a bad word to say about him. He lived alone, kept to himself. If someone wanted him dead, they left no clue as to why. The absence of a clear motive unsettles the investigators. In most murders, motive is the thread that unravels the mystery, the key that unlocks the killer's identity. Here, the thread leads nowhere. The killer took nothing, left nothing, vanished without a trace. The press seizes on this detail, their headlines growing more lurid by the hour. Murder without motive. Killer leaves cash behind. The public is captivated, their imaginations running wild with theories. Was Fink the victim of a personal vendetta? A random act of violence? Or something stranger, something darker, a killing for the sake of the impossible? The detectives revisit every theory, every scrap of evidence. They question the neighbors again, searching for any hint of jealousy or resentment. They comb through Fink's correspondence, his business dealings, his past in Poland. Nothing emerges. The man was as ordinary and unremarkable as the crime was extraordinary. As the hours pass and the city resumes its restless rhythm, the detectives are left with a chilling realization. The murder of Isidor Fink defies not only logic, but reason itself. The killer entered a locked room, shot a man at close range, and left without taking a thing. The money, the valuables, the day's receipts all remain, silent witnesses to a crime that should not have been possible. In the end, the untouched cash and unclaimed treasures become symbols of the case itself, evidence not of what was taken, but of what was left behind, a void, a question, a mystery that deepens with every answer found. The city moves on, but in the little laundry on East 132nd Street, the impossible lingers, growing heavier with each passing day. The motive, like the method, remains locked away, another secret in a room full of them. By the time the sun sets on the second day after Isidor Fink's death, the story has already escaped the cramped, blood-scented laundry on East 132nd Street and begun to seep into every corner of New York City. It spreads first through whispers and rumors, neighbors leaning over stoops, newsboys hawking the evening edition, bartenders recounting the tale to wide-eyed patrons. But by morning, it is everywhere, a mystery that has gripped the city's imagination like a fever. The headlines are relentless and sensational, splashed across the front pages in bold, black type. Murder in a locked room. Police baffled. The perfect crime in Harlem? Killer vanishes into thin air. Reporters descend on the block in droves, their notebooks and cameras in hand, their questions sharp and insistent. They jostle for position outside the laundry, interviewing anyone who will speak, neighbors, beat cops, even the milkman who passed by just before the murder. Mrs. Lachlan Smith, the neighbor who first raised the alarm, finds herself besieged by journalists eager to hear her account of the night's terror. Her words are quoted in paper after paper, each version growing more dramatic. "I heard him scream. I know I did. It was like someone was being murdered right there. But when the police came, the doors were locked tight as a drum." The city's appetite for the impossible is insatiable. The locked room enigma becomes the talk of the town, debated in smoky speakeasies, whispered about in the pews of Harlem's churches, and dissected in the editorial columns of the city's most respected papers. The New York Times, usually so restrained, runs a lengthy feature on the case, complete with diagrams of the laundry's layout and interviews with criminologists and amateur sleuths. The Daily News, never one to shy from sensation, dubs it the perfect murder, a phrase that sticks and is repeated in every borough. Theories multiply like shadows at dusk. Some are plausible, an accomplice waiting outside, a secret passage, a weapon tossed to a Confederate. Others are wild, bordering on the supernatural, a killer who could walk through walls, a ghost seeking vengeance, a curse brought over from the old world. The city's armchair detectives, clerks, cabbies, school teachers debate the case with the fervor usually reserved for baseball scores and boxing matches. Everyone has a theory, and no one has an answer. The police, for their part, are both embarrassed and exasperated. Commissioner Grover Whalen faces a barrage of questions at every press conference, his answers growing more clipped with each passing day. "We are pursuing all leads," he insists, but the reporters press on. "Is it true there was no way in or out? Do you have any suspects? Is New York safe when a man can be murdered in a locked room?" The department's reputation is on the line, and the pressure is immense. Detectives work around the clock, re-interviewing witnesses, re-examining evidence, but each new detail only deepens the mystery. The locked doors, the untouched cash, the absence of a weapon, each is a piece of a puzzle that refuses to come together. The public's fascination soon takes on a life of its own. The laundry becomes a macabre tourist attraction, drawing crowds who gawk at the boarded-up windows and speculate about the crime. Vendors appear, hawking newspapers and penny dreadfuls with lurid illustrations of the Harlem Phantom. Children dare each other to touch the door, convinced that the ghost of Isidor Fink still haunts the place. Writers and intellectuals seize on the case as a symbol of the city's contradictions, a place of order and chaos, of progress and peril. Editorials muse on the fragility of safety in a modern metropolis, the limits of reason, the ever-present threat of the unknown. If a man can be murdered in a locked room, one columnist writes, then what hope is there for the rest of us? The case even attracts the attention of the nation's most famous detective fiction writers. Letters arrive at police headquarters, offering advice and solutions, some earnest, some mocking. The locked room mystery, a staple of pulp magazines and dime novels, has come to life in the heart of New York, and the line between fact and fiction blurs. In Harlem, the mood is tense. Some see the murder as a sign of deeper troubles, a city grown too large, too impersonal, too indifferent to the fates of its most vulnerable. Others treat it as a grim entertainment, a story to be retold with each new embellishment. For Isidor Fink, there are no mourners, no family to claim his body, only the cold curiosity of a city that has made him a legend. As the days turn to weeks, the intrigue only grows. The police, out of leads and out of explanations, begin to avoid the subject, their silence feeding the sense of dread and wonder. The phrase, "the perfect murder," becomes a catch-all for any unsolved crime, a shorthand for the city's darkest fears. And so the story endures, not just as a crime, but as a myth, a locked room, a vanished killer, a city held in thrall by the impossible. The murder of Isidor Fink becomes more than a case. It becomes a riddle, a warning, a legend whispered in the shadows of Harlem and beyond. As the days after Isidor Fink's murder slip by, the city's fascination with the locked room enigma grows. But inside the Harlem precinct, the mood is one of mounting frustration. For all their exhaustive efforts, fingerprints, forensics, and fruitless searches for hidden compartments, the detectives are left with the most basic question of all. Who would want Isidor Fink dead? Detective McKenna and his colleagues begin the slow, methodical process of interviewing everyone who might have known the victim. They start with the immediate neighbors, the men and women who lived cheek by jowl with Fink in the tenement above and beside the laundry. Mrs. Lachlan Smith, still shaken from the night of the murder, insists she never saw Fink quarrel with anyone. He was a quiet man, kept to himself, she tells the detectives, her hands twisting a handkerchief in her lap. Never raised his voice. Never brought trouble to anyone's door. The police move on to the other tenants, immigrants like Fink, most from Eastern Europe, some from the South, all struggling to carve out a living in the city's relentless churn. They describe Fink as reserved, almost painfully so. He worked long hours, rarely socialized, and was known for his caution. He'd sooner bolt the door than open it, even for a friend, says Mr. Abramovitz, who ran the bakery 2 doors down. Didn't trust banks, didn't trust people. But he never did anyone harm. The detectives press further, seeking out Fink's customers. They comb through the laundry's ledger, tracking down names and addresses. Some remember him as meticulous, others as standoffish, but none recall any confrontation or ill will. He pressed my shirts for years, one man shrugs. Always a fair price. Never a crossword. They check with local merchants, delivery boys, even the occasional policeman who walked the beat. The pattern repeats. Fink was honest, punctual, and utterly unremarkable. He had no debts, no disputes, no known enemies. If he had a secret life, he kept it well hidden. The detectives dig deeper, probing his past. They wire inquiries to Poland, searching for any hint of trouble left behind in the old country, political enemies, family feuds, old debts. The responses trickle in, each more disappointing than the last. Fink's family, what little remained, had lost touch with him years ago. There were no outstanding warrants, no rumors of criminal ties, no evidence of a shadowy past. They even consider the possibility of a crime of passion, a jealous lover, a spurned suitor, a clandestine affair gone wrong. But Fink's life, as far as anyone can tell, was devoid of romance. He had no wife, no girlfriend, no close friends at all. His only companions were the customers who came and went, the neighbors who nodded politely in the hallway, the city that swallowed him whole. The police questioned the boy who unlocked the door, searching for any sign of complicity. They grilled the delivery men, the repairmen, the itinerant workers who drifted through the neighborhood. Each is cleared, their alibis checked and rechecked. None had the means, the motive, or the opportunity to commit a murder so audacious and inexplicable. Desperate, the detectives revisit the scene, searching for anything they might have missed, a scrap of paper, a hidden letter, a clue overlooked in the chaos. But the room remains stubbornly silent, the evidence cold and unyielding. The press, sensing the police's frustration, begins to speculate wildly. Was Fink the victim of mistaken identity? Was he targeted by a criminal syndicate, a foreign agent, a madman on the loose? Each theory is more outlandish than the last, but none fit the facts. The locked room, the untouched valuables, the absence of a weapon, each detail conspires to make the case more baffling, not less. In the end, the detectives are forced to admit what they have suspected all along. Isidor Fink had no known enemies. He was a man without a past, a victim without a suspect, a puzzle without a solution. The city, for all its noise and fury, offers only silence in return. The investigation grinds on, but with each passing day, the hope of finding Fink's killer fades. The case file thickens with interviews, reports, and dead ends, a testament to the limits of reason in the face of the impossible. The locked room mystery remains just that, locked, impenetrable, and utterly unsolved. In the weeks and months that followed Isidor Fink's impossible death, the story of the Harlem laundry murder outgrew the narrow, steam-stained walls of 4 East 132nd Street. It slipped from the hands of the police and the press and into the collective imagination of a city, and soon, a nation, hungry for stories that defied explanation. The case became more than a crime. It became a riddle, a legend, a touchstone for every conversation about the limits of logic and the darkness that can hide in plain sight. The phrase, locked room mystery, was not new to New Yorkers. The city's newsstands were stacked high with pulp magazines and detective novels, their covers adorned with shadowy figures and blood-spattered clues. But this case was different. This was not a tale spun by a fevered imagination or a puzzle solved by a fictional sleuth. Isidor Fink's murder was real, its facts as cold and unyielding as the brick walls that had contained his final moments. The police, for all their experience, could not explain it. The press, for all their bluster, could not solve it. And so, the story grew. In the smoky back rooms of Harlem's speakeasies, men argued over whiskey and cards about how the killer could have vanished from a room sealed tighter than a bank vault. In the parlor rooms of brownstone's uptown, amateur detectives pored over newspaper diagrams, tracing the lines of the laundry's floor plan with trembling fingers. On the subway and in the parks, children dared each other to guess the secret passage or invisible hand that had claimed Fink's life. The case became a proving ground for the city's would-be sleuths and armchair detectives. Letters poured into police headquarters, each one offering a new solution, each more elaborate than the last. Some insisted the killer had been hidden in the room all along, concealed behind a false wall or beneath the floorboards, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Others claimed the shots had been fired through the transom by a marksman of impossible skill, the weapon passed to an accomplice waiting in the shadows. A few, emboldened by the city's fascination with the occult, whispered of ghosts or curses, of a vengeful spirit that could waft through walls and vanish into thin air. The police, for their part, found themselves caught between ridicule and awe. The case file grew thicker by the day, filled not with answers but with questions, each more confounding than the last. The detectives who had walked the scene, who had tapped every wall and pried at every nail, became minor celebrities, their names invoked in newspaper columns and radio broadcasts. Yet they could offer only shrugs and haunted glances, their authority undermined by a crime that refused to be solved. The legend of the locked room murder seeped into popular culture. Cartoonists lampooned the police, drawing detectives scratching their heads outside a brick box labeled Fink's Laundry. Crime writers borrowed details for their own stories, weaving the facts into new fictions that blurred the line between reality and invention. The phrase "fink it" entered the city's slang, meaning to be caught in a situation with no way out. As the years passed, the story was retold and embellished, the facts bending to fit the needs of each new generation. Some claimed the killer had used a clever mechanical device, a string tied to the lock and pulled from outside. Others insisted the murder was the work of a criminal mastermind, a figure who moved unseen through the city's shadows, leaving no trace but fear. The truth, always just out of reach, became less important than the mystery itself. Detective McKenna, long since retired, was sometimes asked about the case by young officers eager to test their wits against the legend. He would shake his head, the memory of that night still sharp as broken glass. "We searched for hours," he would say. "We checked every inch of that room. There was no way in and no way out. But Fink was dead, all the same." The locked room murder of Isidor Fink became a cautionary tale for the city's lawmen, a reminder that not every crime can be solved, not every secret uncovered. It became a comfort, too, for those who found solace in the idea that some mysteries are bigger than any one man, any one moment. In a city built on certainty and order, the impossible was sometimes allowed to stand. And so, the legend endured. The laundry at 4 East 132nd Street was eventually shuttered, its windows boarded and its walls repainted. But the story lingered, passed from father to son, from neighbor to neighbor, from one generation of New Yorkers to the next. It was a story of fear, of wonder, of the limits of human understanding, a locked room mystery for the ages, and a testament to the enduring power of the unknown. As the weeks turned into months, and the murder of Isidor Fink remained as impenetrable as the locked laundry room itself, the case began to attract the attention of not just the city's press and public, but of experts, detectives, criminologists, and puzzle solvers from across the country and, eventually, the world. The Fink case, as it came to be known in professional circles, was no longer just a police matter. It was a challenge, a riddle that taunted the very best minds in the business of crime. The New York Police Department, stung by the ridicule of the press and the mounting frustration of their own ranks, quietly invited outside consultants to review the evidence. Among the first was Inspector Arthur Doyle, a retired detective with a reputation for solving cold cases. Doyle spent 3 days in the little laundry, pacing its perimeter, tapping on walls, measuring the transom, and interrogating every officer who had been on the scene that night. His conclusion, delivered with a sigh and a shake of the head, was as unsatisfying as it was honest. There is no physical way for a man to have entered or left this room unseen. The only thing that makes sense is that the victim knew his killer and let him in. But the locks, the windows, none of it fits. If this is a trick, it is a masterful one. The NYPD's own forensic consultants, led by Dr. Samuel Hirsch, returned to their ballistics and powder tests, hoping that a missed detail might break the case open. They reviewed the trajectories, the wound patterns, the absence of powder burns on Fink's clothing. They tested the locks, the hinges, the nails in the windows. Again and again, the answer was the same. The shots were fired from within the room, at close range. There are no signs of forced entry, no prints but Fink's, no weapon left behind. It is as if the killer vanished into thin air. The case soon drew the attention of the nation's leading criminologists. Professor Charles Van Dusen of Columbia University, a specialist in criminal psychology and so-called impossible crimes, wrote a lengthy article for a law journal, dissecting every known fact. He proposed, then dismissed, a dozen theories. The hidden accomplice theory. Perhaps the killer had an accomplice waiting outside, to whom he tossed the weapon through the transom or a crack in the window. But the transom was too small for a gun to pass through, and the windows were nailed shut. The suicide theory. Maybe Fink had taken his own life, and the weapon had somehow vanished. But the wounds were not self-inflicted, and no gun was ever found. The secret passage theory. Could there be a hidden door or tunnel? The building's blueprints showed no such feature, and exhaustive searches confirmed it. The mechanical trick theory. Was there a device, a string or wire, used to lock the door from the outside? No evidence of such a mechanism was found, and the locks were of a type that could not be manipulated in this way. Van Dusen's conclusion was as chilling as it was unsatisfying. Every logical explanation fails. We are left with the impossible, or the as yet unimagined. The case became a favorite topic at criminology conferences. Panels debated the Fink paradox, with experts in forensics, psychology, and even stage magic weighing in. Some suggested that the killer might have been a contortionist or a circus performer, able to slip through impossibly small spaces. Others speculated about new, undetectable poisons or exotic weapons, though none fit the facts as known. Detective McKenna, by now weary of the endless speculation, attended one such gathering at the New York Academy of Sciences. He listened as a parade of experts offered their theories, each more elaborate than the last. Some spoke of mirrors and misdirection, of secret societies and criminal masterminds. One even suggested that the entire crime was a hallucination, a collective delusion brought on by the stress of city life. After hours of debate, McKenna stood and addressed the room. "Gentlemen, I have walked that scene 100 times. I have checked every lock, every nail, every inch of that room. I have spoken to every witness, every neighbor, every expert. And I am no closer to an answer than I was the night we found Fink's body. If there is a solution, it is beyond my understanding, and, I suspect, beyond yours as well." The audience fell silent, the weight of the unsolved pressing down on them all. The Fink case became a touchstone in the literature of crime. It was cited in textbooks as an example of the locked room problem, discussed in detective fiction as the ultimate unsolved mystery. Amateur sleuths continued to write letters to the police, offering their own solutions, some plausible, most fanciful. None were ever proven. As the years passed, the case faded from the headlines, but never from the minds of those who had tried to solve it. For the detectives who had worked the scene, for the experts who had staked their reputations on finding an answer, the Fink murder remained a haunting reminder of the limits of human reason. It was a case that mocked explanation, that refused to be solved. And so, the legend grew. The murder of Isidor Fink was not just a crime. It was a challenge, a puzzle, a ghost story for the rational age. It was, as the press had dubbed it, the perfect murder, not because it was flawless, but because it was, and remains, unsolvable. As the weeks stretched into months and the headlines faded from the city's front pages, the murder of Isidor Fink left an indelible mark on Harlem and the wider city. The locked room enigma had become more than a puzzle for detectives and a curiosity for the press. It had seeped into the psyche of the neighborhood, casting a long, uneasy shadow over daily life. For the residents of East 132nd Street, the sense of safety they had painstakingly built in the city's restless heart was shattered. The laundry, once a mundane fixture, a place where shirts were pressed, collars starched, and gossip exchanged, became a locus of dread. People crossed the street to avoid its boarded windows. Mothers warned their children not to linger near its door. In the hush of late evenings, neighbors glanced at the darkened storefront and wondered what evil could slip past locks and bolts, what violence could unfold behind walls that should have offered sanctuary. Fear, at first, was the most immediate response. The knowledge that a man could be murdered in a room sealed tighter than a vault, with no sign of entry or exit, unsettled even the most rational minds. Was there a killer still at large? One who could bypass the defenses of any home, strike without warning, and vanish without a trace? The idea wormed its way into every conversation, every anxious glance at a locked window or bolted door. Hardware stores reported a surge in sales of locks and window bars. Tenants demanded extra security from landlords. Night watchmen, once a rare sight, began to patrol the block. But fear was only one side of the coin. Alongside it grew a dark fascination, a collective obsession with the mystery that refused to be solved. In the evenings, groups gathered in parlors and stoops to debate the case, each person offering a new theory, a new angle, a new piece of the puzzle. Some clung to the hope that the police would soon announce a breakthrough, that the impossible would be made possible by some overlooked clue. Others reveled in the uncertainty, finding a perverse comfort in the idea that some things, even in this modern age, could not be explained. The story of Fink's murder became a kind of urban folklore. Children dared each other to touch the laundry's door, whispering tales of ghosts and invisible killers. Shopkeepers swapped rumors about secret societies and vengeful spirits. At church, sermons invoked the case as a warning, a reminder that evil could lurk anywhere, that no lock or ritual could guarantee safety. The city's writers and poets found inspiration in the case, weaving it into stories and songs that spoke to the city's fascination with the unknown. For those who had known Fink, the psychological toll was more personal, more acute. Mrs. Lachlan Smith, who had heard the fatal struggle and summoned the police, found herself plagued by guilt and nightmares. She replayed the night in her mind, wondering if she could have done more, if she had missed some sign, some cry for help. Others who had frequented the laundry, who had exchanged polite greetings with Fink, felt a chill each time they remembered his quiet presence. His absence became a haunting, a silent reminder of the fragility of life in a city that never stopped moving. The police, too, were changed by the case. Detectives who prided themselves on their ability to solve any crime found themselves humbled, even haunted, by their failure. The case became a cautionary tale within the department, a reminder that not every mystery could be unraveled by logic and persistence. Some officers grew superstitious, refusing to walk the beat past the laundry after dark. Others became obsessed, poring over the case files long after official interest had waned, searching for the answer that always seemed just out of reach. As the seasons turned and the city's attention shifted to new scandals and tragedies, the psychological effects of the Fink murder lingered. The laundry remained closed, its windows gathering dust, its door locked tight. But the story endured, in whispers and nightmares, in the rituals of locking up at night, in the uneasy knowledge that some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. The locked room mystery had become a locked room in the minds of the community, a space where fear and fascination mingled, where the boundaries between reason and superstition blurred. The murder of Isidor Fink was no longer just a crime. It was a wound, a question, a shadow that stretched far beyond the walls of a tiny Harlem laundry. In the months and years that followed Isidor Fink's murder, the facts of the case became only the foundation for something larger and stranger, a living tapestry of rumor, speculation, an urban legend that wove itself through the city's consciousness. The locked room, the vanished killer, the utter lack of motive or clue. These were the seeds from which 1,000 stories would grow, each more fantastical than the last. It began, as such things do, in whispers. The neighbors on East 132nd Street, still shaken by the violence that had erupted so close to home, found themselves unable to let the matter rest. As they gathered on stoops in the fading evening light, their conversations turned from the practical to the speculative. He must have known his killer, some insisted. It was a crime of passion, a secret lover, perhaps, or a jealous rival. Others shook their heads, pointing out Fink's solitary habits, his lack of close friends or entanglements. No, it had to be a stranger. Someone with a grudge from the old country, come to settle a score. But the more the facts were examined, the less sense they made. The locked doors, the untouched valuables, the missing weapon, each detail seemed to mock rational explanation. And so, as the weeks passed and the police investigation stalled, the stories grew wilder. Some claimed to have seen a shadowy figure slipping down the alley that night, a man in a long coat who vanished before he could be followed. Others spoke of strange noises in the walls, of secret tunnels dug by bootleggers during Prohibition, now used by criminals to move unseen beneath the city. A few even suggested that Fink himself had been involved in something illicit, that he had double-crossed the wrong people and paid the ultimate price. But it was the supernatural explanations that truly took root in the city's imagination. Harlem, like all of New York, was a place where old-world superstitions mingled with new-world anxieties. Some whispered that Fink had been cursed, that he had angered a Dybbuk, a restless spirit from the folklore of Eastern Europe, capable of slipping through cracks and keyholes to exact its revenge. Others spoke of ghosts, of vengeful souls who could pass through walls and leave no trace. Maybe it wasn't a man at all, one old woman muttered to her neighbor. Maybe it was something else, something you can't keep out with locks and bolts. Children, eager for thrills, dared each other to spend a night outside the shuttered laundry. They told stories of Fink's ghost, doomed to wander the room forever, searching for justice that would never come. Some claimed to hear his footsteps late at night, or to see a pale face at the window, staring out into the darkness. The press, always hungry for a new angle, fanned the flames. Tabloids ran lurid stories of the Harlem Phantom, speculating about secret societies, occult rituals, and ancient curses. Editorial cartoonists depicted the police as bumbling fools, baffled by a crime that defied the laws of man and nature alike. Even the more respectable papers could not resist the allure of the unknown, publishing long features on the history of locked room mysteries and the limits of human reason. As time passed, the case became a kind of Rorschach test for the city's fears and fantasies. For some, it was a cautionary tale about the dangers of isolation and mistrust. For others, it was proof that evil could strike anywhere, at any time, no matter how careful one might be. For a few, it was a sign that the world was stranger and perhaps more magical than anyone had dared to imagine. Detective McKenna, who had led the original investigation, watched the proliferation of theories with a mixture of amusement and resignation. He knew better than anyone how little evidence there was for any of the stories that now swirled around the case. And yet, he could not entirely dismiss them. Sometimes, he told a young reporter years later, the truth is just what's left when all the stories are told and none of them fit. In the end, the murder of Isidor Fink became less a crime to be solved than a legend to be retold, a story that belonged not to the police or the press, but to the city itself. It was a story that grew with each retelling, that changed shape to fit the needs of each new generation. And as long as the laundry stood, boarded and silent, it remained a place where the boundary between fact and fiction, reason and superstition, grew thin as a pane of dusty glass. As the final leaves of autumn fell on Harlem, the once frenzied investigation into the murder of Isidor Fink slowed to a reluctant crawl. The city's initial shock and fascination faded into a weary resignation, and the locked-room mystery that had once dominated headlines and dinner-table conversations became a cold, silent wait in the back rooms of the police precinct. Detective McKenna, who had once stalked the narrow confines of the laundry with a sense of purpose, now found himself staring at the same yellowing case files, the same photographs, the same floor plans marked with red pencil. Each page was a testament to effort and futility. Lists of interviewed neighbors, diagrams of the room, inventories of Fink's untouched belongings, and endless notes on the doors, the windows, the transom. The evidence, so meticulously catalogued, had not changed. The facts remained as stubborn and impenetrable as the locked room itself. The daily briefings grew shorter. Leads that had once seemed promising, anonymous tips, vague sightings, rumors of a stranger in the neighborhood, were followed to their disappointing ends. The boy who had crawled through the transom was questioned and re-questioned, his account unchanged. Forensics reports were re-examined, but there was nothing new to be found in the powder patterns or the trajectory of the bullets. The cash and valuables, still untouched, mocked the notion of robbery. The lack of motive, the absence of suspects, and the impossibility of the crime itself left detectives with little to do but speculate in circles. The press, sensing the story's slow death, moved on to fresher scandals. The perfect murder headlines gave way to new tales of corruption, political intrigue, and celebrity scandal. Only the occasional editorial or letter to the editor kept the memory of Fink's murder alive, usually as a symbol of the city's unsolved mysteries and the limits of modern policing. Inside the precinct, the Fink file was moved from the active case board to the cold case drawer. It joined the ranks of other unsolved crimes, murders with no witness, disappearances without a trace, mysteries that had outlasted the patience and resources of the department. The file grew dusty, its pages curling at the edges, its photographs fading. New detectives, eager to make their mark, would sometimes pull it out, reading through the details with a mix of awe and frustration, only to return it to its resting place, defeated by the same lack of evidence that had stymied their predecessors. For the community, the slow death of the investigation brought a different kind of closure, a resignation that the truth would never be known. The laundry remained shuttered, its windows gathering grime, its sign faded and unreadable. The neighbors, once gripped by fear and fascination, learned to live with the unknown. The story of Fink's murder became another thread in the city's tapestry of legend and loss, told in hushed tones to newcomers and children, always ending with the same shrug. They never found out who did it. They never figured out how. Detective McKenna, now older and grayer, sometimes found himself walking past the old laundry late at night, pausing to look at the door that had once seemed to promise answers. He would remember the long hours, the endless theories, the hope that some overlooked clue would break the case wide open. But the city had moved on, and so had he. The Fink case remained, a locked room in his memory, sealed by time and the unyielding silence of the dead. And so, the case of Isidor Fink grew cold. The investigation stalled, the files gathered dust, and the impossible murder faded into the city's long history of unsolved mysteries. Yet for those who remembered, the story lingered, a reminder that some doors, once closed, remain forever locked. As the years slipped by and the city's skyline grew taller, the murder of Isidor Fink transformed from a local tragedy into a legend that echoed far beyond the tenement walls of Harlem. The case, unsolved and unyielding, became a touchstone in the annals of crime, a riddle that outlived its victim, its investigators, and even the generation that first whispered about it in the shadowed streets. For the police, the file on Fink's murder was never truly closed. It gathered dust in the cold case archives, yet every so often, a rookie detective or a seasoned inspector would pull it from the shelf, compelled by the sheer impossibility of the crime. The diagrams, floor plans, window measurements, sketches of the transom became a rite of passage for New York's finest. If you can solve Fink, the old-timers would say, you can solve anything. None ever did. But it was outside the precinct, in the world of words and ideas, that the Fink case found its true immortality. The locked room mystery, once the province of penny dreadfuls and drawing room puzzles, now had a real-life example more baffling than any fiction. Writers of detective stories seized on the details, the sealed room, the missing weapon, the absence of motive. The name Isidor Fink began to appear in the pages of mystery magazines and novels, sometimes as a direct reference, sometimes as a sly homage. A laundryman found dead, a room no one could enter or leave, a city haunted by the unsolvable. The greats of the genre, Ellery Queen, John Dixon Carr, Agatha Christie, were all said to have studied the Fink case. Carr, the master of the locked room puzzle, famously remarked in an interview, "There are only 4 ways to kill a man in a locked room, unless, of course, you're in Harlem in 1929. The case became a benchmark, a challenge to every writer who dared to pit their wits against the impossible. Anthologies of unsolved mysteries invariably included a chapter on Fink, and true crime collections recounted the story with a mixture of awe and frustration. In the decades that followed, the legend only grew. Radio dramas and early television crime shows adapted the story, sometimes changing the names, sometimes embellishing the details, but always preserving the core enigma: a man murdered in a room locked from the inside, with no way in or out. The phrase "finked" entered the lexicon of mystery fans, shorthand for any puzzle that defied solution. Academics, too, found fascination in the case. Criminology textbooks cited it as the ultimate example of the locked room problem, a reminder of the limitations of forensic science and deductive reasoning. Conferences devoted sessions to the Fink murder, inviting experts to propose new theories, each more elaborate than the last, none more convincing than the original bafflement of the police. The case became a staple in university courses on criminal investigation, its details dissected and debated by generations of students. In true crime circles, the Fink case was revered as a kind of holy grail. Writers and podcasters revisited the evidence, interviewing descendants of the original detectives, poring over faded photographs and yellowed newspaper clippings. Each retelling brought new listeners and readers into the fold, ensuring that the story would never be forgotten. Some even traveled to Harlem, hoping to glimpse the old laundry, to stand where the impossible had happened, to feel the chill of unsolved mystery. The case also left its mark on the city itself. For a time, the phrase "locked room" became a byword for any unsolved crime in New York, invoked by reporters and police alike. The laundry on East 132nd Street, long since closed and repurposed, became a point of pilgrimage for mystery buffs and urban explorers. Local historians included the Fink murder in walking tours of Harlem, recounting the tale to wide-eyed visitors as dusk settled over the city. Yet for all the fascination, the story of Isidor Fink remained, at its core, a tragedy, a life ended, a community shaken, a question left unanswered. The legend endured not because of the cleverness of the crime, but because of its stubborn refusal to yield to reason. In a world that prided itself on progress and knowledge, the Fink case was a reminder that some doors, once closed, could never be opened. And so, the murder of Isidor Fink lived on, in the pages of detective fiction, in the annals of true crime, in the whispered stories of a city that never truly sleeps. It became more than a case. It became a legacy, a testament to the enduring power of mystery and to the human need to seek answers, even when none can be found. Decades passed, and the city that had once been transfixed by the locked room murder of Isidor Fink changed in ways both subtle and profound. The laundry on East 132nd Street was eventually replaced by a corner store, then a row of apartments, and finally a faceless brick building that bore no trace of the impossible crime that had transpired there. Yet, the story of Fink's death endured, an unsolved riddle, a ghostly presence haunting the archives of New York and the imaginations of all who heard it. As the years rolled on, each new generation discovered the case anew. It became a rite of passage for amateur sleuths and true crime enthusiasts, the story of the man murdered in a room locked from the inside, with no way in or out, no weapon, no motive, and no suspect. The details, passed down through books, lectures, and late-night radio shows, retained their power to unsettle and intrigue. In university criminology classes, Professors would challenge their students. If you can solve Fink, you can solve anything. The students would pore over the faded diagrams, the grainy photographs, the list of suspects, and the catalog of evidence, only to find themselves stymied by the same impenetrable wall that had confounded the detectives of 1929. Writers, too, continued to be drawn to the case. Each decade brought new retellings, magazine features, documentary segments, podcasts dissecting every theory from the plausible to the preposterous. The Fink murder became a touchstone for the genre of the impossible crime, cited in every anthology of unsolved mysteries, every essay on the limits of forensic science. Theories waxed and waned in popularity. Some insisted the answer must lie in a mechanical trick or a hidden accomplice. Others clung to the idea of a supernatural force, a ghost or demon that could slip through walls. But always, the facts remained as stubborn and unmoving as the locked door. Fink was shot at close range, the room was sealed, and the killer vanished without a trace. The legend of the case grew with each retelling. In the 1950s, a wave of interest in real-life mysteries swept the nation, and the Fink case was featured in radio dramas and pulp magazines. In the 1970s, as forensic science advanced, new experts revisited the evidence, hoping that modern techniques might succeed where old-fashioned detective work had failed. But the physical evidence had long since vanished, and the photographs and reports offered no new clues. The case remained cold, its secrets locked away by time. In the internet age, the story found new life. Online forums buzzed with speculation, and digital sleuths from around the world dissected every detail. Some traveled to Harlem, hoping to stand on the spot where the impossible had happened, to feel a connection to the mystery that had outlived its era. Documentaries and podcasts introduced the case to audiences who had never heard of Isidor Fink, and each new retelling brought fresh eyes and fresh frustration to the puzzle. For the families who lived in the neighborhood, the story became part of the local folklore. Children grew up hearing tales of the man in the locked room, and teenagers dared each other to spend a night near the old building, hoping for a glimpse of Fink's restless spirit. The case was a reminder that the city, for all its noise and light, still held shadows, places where reason faltered and the unknown reigned. Yet, for all the fascination, the truth remained elusive. Each generation brought new theories, new investigations, new hope that the answer might finally be found. But the locked room held fast to its secret. The files, now brittle and yellowed, remained in the city archives, a silent testament to the limits of human understanding. The detectives who had once pored over the evidence were gone, their notes and memories fading into history. But the question they had asked, how could a man be murdered in a room no one could enter or leave, remained as urgent and unanswerable as ever. The enduring enigma of Isidor Fink's murder became more than a story, it became a symbol. It was invoked by philosophers as proof that not all mysteries yield to logic, by writers as evidence that truth is sometimes stranger than fiction, by city dwellers as a reminder that even the most ordinary places can harbor the extraordinary. In a world increasingly convinced that every secret can be uncovered, every crime solved, the Fink case stood as a quiet, stubborn rebuke. And so, the story endures. New generations revisit the case, drawn by the allure of the impossible, the hope that they might succeed where others have failed. They study the diagrams, debate the theories, walk the streets of Harlem searching for echoes of the past. But the truth, whatever it may be, remains just out of reach, locked away in a room that no one can enter, and from which no answer can escape. The years have rolled onward, and New York's skyline has changed 100 times since the night a frightened laundryman locked his doors against the world and vanished into legend. The story of Isidor Fink's murder endures, not merely as a case file or a cautionary tale, but as a living enigma, one that has outlasted the men who investigated it, the neighbors who whispered about it, and even the building where it all began. Fink's death is now woven into the city's tapestry of myth and memory, a story retold in shadowed corners and late-night radio shows, in detective anthologies and true crime podcasts. Each generation finds itself drawn to the riddle, a man murdered in a room sealed from the inside, with no weapon, no suspect, and not a single clue that could pierce the veil of impossibility. The facts remain as stark and immutable as ever. 3 close-range gunshots, a locked door, windows nailed shut, valuables untouched, and a city left to wonder. The police, for all their skill and doggedness, could only admit defeat. The file, thick with interviews, floor plans, and dead-end theories, was consigned to the cold case archives, there to gather dust alongside the city's other unsolved mysteries. Detectives who once pored over the evidence grew old and retired, some still haunted by the case that refused to yield. New recruits, eager to prove themselves, would sometimes pull the file, hoping for a flash of insight, only to return it, humbled by the same walls that had stymied their predecessors. Outside the precinct, the legend grew. Writers of detective fiction cited the Fink case as the gold standard of the locked room mystery, a real-life puzzle that even the most ingenious fictional sleuths might have failed to solve. Criminologists and armchair detectives debated it endlessly, proposing solutions that ranged from the mechanical to the supernatural, each ultimately falling short of the hard, unyielding facts. The case became a touchstone in the study of crime, a reminder that not every question has an answer, not every door can be forced open by logic alone. For the people of Harlem, the story became part of the neighborhood's folklore, a whispered warning about the limits of safety and the unpredictability of fate. The laundry itself, long since repurposed or demolished, lingered in memory as a place where the ordinary and the impossible had collided, leaving behind a mystery as chilling as the night it happened. Children grew up hearing tales of Fink's ghost, neighbors remembered the fear that gripped their block, and old-timers would shake their heads and say, "Some things you just can't explain." In the wider world, Isidor Fink's name became synonymous with the unsolvable. His death was invoked in textbooks, podcasts, and documentaries as the quintessential locked room case, a story that challenged the very notion of closure. It was a reminder that, for all our advances, there remain corners of the human experience that defy reason, crimes that slip through the cracks of understanding and remain forever in shadow. And so, the legacy of Isidor Fink endures. His murder stands as one of history's most baffling unsolved crimes, a riddle that has outlasted its time, a question that continues to haunt the curious and the skeptical alike. In a city that prides itself on answers, the case remains a monument to the enduring power of mystery and to the truth that some doors, once locked, are never meant to be opened.